On November 13, 2025, at approximately 2 a.m., Baton Rouge police responded to an emergency call reporting a severely injured woman in a parking lot along Old Hammond Highway. Upon arrival, officers located 23-year-old Stacy Charles with multiple significant stab wounds, indicating a rapid and targeted attack that had concluded only minutes before law enforcement reached the scene. Emergency medical personnel transported her to the hospital for immediate surgery, but she did not survive her injuries. As detectives began securing the area and identifying potential evidence, a second call was dispatched to authorities regarding a single-vehicle crash occurring only a short distance from the stabbing location. The driver involved in the crash was identified as 28-year-old Stephen Heinrich Jr., who was immediately recognized as the primary suspect connected to Stasy's stabbing. When officers attempted to approach Heinrich's crashed vehicle, he ignited himself inside the car, causing extensive burns that required emergency medical transport. Despite intervention, he later died at the hospital.
Balloons taking flight to honor the life of a woman lost to domestic violence. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. Family and friends of Stacy Charles say a New Orleans woman who was killed in Baton Rouge last week are celebrating her life.
She was stabbed to death by her ex-boyfriend. The investigative unit's best casualty has been following this story closely. She reports tonight from Gretna, where that memorial took place, and has new information on the circumstances that led up to her murder.
Michael, Sylvia, we're here in Gretna, which is near Charles's hometown of Harvey. There were dozens of people, they're still lingering here behind me, that came to celebrate her life, releasing purple balloons in her honor.
The WBRZ investigative unit has obtained more documents showing the rocky relationship history that led to 2 deaths. According to Baton Rouge police, 28-year-old Stephen Heinrich stabbed 23-year-old Stacy Charles to death before crashing his car and setting himself on fire.
With both the victim and the suspect deceased within hours of one another, investigators turned their attention to reconstructing the chain of events that led to this outcome. The case quickly revealed an established history between the 2 individuals, including previously filed protective orders, documented allegations of threats, and earlier incidents of domestic abuse. You're watching Crimelens Uncovered, where the spotlight of social media casts the darkest shadows. Subscribe if you want the unfiltered truth behind the trending hashtags, because by the time a story explodes online, the tragedy has already happened. Now let's dive in. Stacy Charles was a 23-year-old woman living in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, whose circumstances highlight the challenges faced when navigating a relationship marked by escalating threats. She maintained a structured lifestyle involving work, social connections, and her local community. Stacy's profile illustrates a young adult who actively engaged with legal and social structures to address escalating danger. Her attempts to create boundaries, document abuse, and request formal protection were consistent and clearly recorded. Stephen Heinrich Jr., 28, was identified as the primary suspect in the fatal stabbing of Stacy Charles in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Court records show that Heinrich had a documented history of abusive behavior toward multiple partners, evidenced by at least 6 out-of-state protective orders previously filed against him. These filings reported harassment, threats, and incidents of physical violence, establishing a pattern of controlling and aggressive behavior across different relationships.
Michael, Sylvia, before Stephen Heinrich came to Louisiana, he had an extensive file of criminal and civil harassment complaints against him filed in Westchester County, New York, including several protective orders.
They could have done their homework.
Dominique Ramkaran says Charles's death should have been prevented.
I said, y'all not going to do anything until someone dies. And look what happened.
Ramkaran, who lives in the same New York town as Heinrich, knows him well. He and her daughter went on a couple dates in 2023, and since then, their entire family's life has been a nightmare.
A year and a half you harassed and stalked my daughter. A year and a half you have tortured us.
She says when her daughter no longer wanted to see Heinrich, he began constantly harassing her, her daughter's friends, and other members of their family to the tune of hundreds of calls and messages a day, often from fake numbers.
To the point my phone is on Do Not Disturb. If you're not in my favorites, you could not reach me.
Ramkaran says the police didn't do much about it until they got a restraining order against him. which he was arrested for violating. However, he never served jail time.
After he violated the order protection numerous times, they gave him probation.
At some point, he came down to Louisiana and began dating Charles. Ramkaran says her daughter's friends tried to warn her.
Rose reached out to the young lady, like, leave this man alone. He's crazy. He's going to stalk you. He's done it to my friend. She didn't believe us.
From the beginning of their relationship, Stephen Heinrich Jr. displayed behaviors that indicated escalating control over Stacy Charles. He monitored her movements, tracked her interactions, and used digital communication, including text messages and social media, to intimidate and surveil her daily life. This surveillance gradually escalated into direct physical aggression, with Heinrich reportedly shoving, punching, and threatening Stasy, including threats involving a weapon. These behaviors created an environment of constant fear and tension. Stacy Charles took formal legal action to protect herself from Stephen Heinrich Jr. after recognizing the danger posed by his escalating behavior. She filed a protective order detailing specific incidents of physical assault, including being punched, shoved, and threatened, and noted that Heinrich had also threatened her with a weapon. Her filing described ongoing harassment, stalking, and intimidation, establishing a documented pattern of behavior rather than isolated incidents.
Court documents show Charles had tried to protect herself from Heinrich multiple times before her death. In a protective order request filed in October in family court, Charles says Heinrich was physically abusive, having checked these boxes, saying he punched, shoved, and threatened her life with a weapon. However, in her written description of the abuse, she does not mention violence, instead stating he was relentlessly harassing and stalking her and her family through social media.
He created like any dating site, any type of thing. This man would create a page for my daughter.
It's behavior that Dominique Ramkaran and her family know well.
Everything that he did to my daughter, he was doing to the same girl.
The initial protective order was not served because law enforcement could not locate Heinrich, and the case was dismissed when Stasy did not appear in court. Following a subsequent incident, Heinrich was arrested for misdemeanor domestic abuse battery, and Stasy was granted a second protective order that legally required Heinrich to avoid contact with her, stay away from her residence, and refrain from approaching her workplace. In the hours before the fatal incident, Stephen Heinrich Jr. continued to display patterns of persistent and escalating behavior towards Stacy Charles. Witnesses reported that she was unusually cautious, altering her routines and avoiding certain locations to minimize contact. Heinrich repeatedly attempted to communicate with her through calls, texts, and social media, ignoring her clear intentions to maintain distance. Evidence shows that he actively monitored her movements and locations, demonstrating a focused effort to track her. In the 48 hours prior to the attack, Heinrich's behavior intensified, with aggressive messages and attempts to confront Stasy despite the existence of a protective order. Friends and acquaintances noted that he appeared increasingly agitated and determined to reestablish control, while Stasy expressed fear and concern for her safety. The protective order, recently granted, outlined previous incidents of physical assault, threats, and intimidation, confirming a documented pattern of violent behavior. Heinrich's disregard for legal boundaries and his continued pursuit created an environment of imminent risk. Each action in this period directly contributed to the escalation that culminated in the deadly confrontation. The combination of stalking, threats, and documented prior abuse, alongside Stasy's attempts to avoid him, set the stage for the attack that would occur in the parking lot on November 13th, making the sequence of events leading to her death both predictable and preventable from a risk assessment standpoint. In the early hours of November 13th, 2025, the fatal events that would claim the lives of both Stacy Charles and Stephen Heinrich Jr. occurred in rapid succession. Around 2 a.m., Baton Rouge police received a 911 call about an injured person in a parking lot on Old Hammond Highway. Officers arrived to find 23-year-old Stacy Charles on the ground, suffering from multiple stab wounds. Emergency personnel worked immediately to stabilize her and transported her to a nearby hospital. Despite surgical intervention, the extent of her injuries proved fatal, and she was pronounced dead during the operation. After fatally stabbing 23-year-old Stacy Charles, 28-year-old Stephen Heinrich Jr., her boyfriend and the primary suspect, left the parking lot in his vehicle in an attempt to evade law enforcement. Police later located his car a short distance from the scene, having been involved in a crash, which indicated a rapid and uncontrolled escape. Upon officers approaching the wrecked vehicle, Heinrich ignited himself, setting the car on fire while he remained inside. Emergency responders quickly intervened, extinguishing the flames and removing him from the vehicle before transporting him to a nearby hospital. Heinrich sustained severe burn injuries covering a large portion of his body, and despite medical treatment, he died later that day. After the deaths of 23-year-old Stacy Charles and her boyfriend, 28-year-old Stephen Heinrich Jr., Baton Rouge police confirmed that both individuals had died from separate incidents, with Charles succumbing to stab wounds in a parking lot and Heinrich dying from severe burns after setting himself on fire inside a crashed vehicle. Police highlighted Heinrich's prior record, noting that he had multiple out-of-state protective orders from other women, and confirmed that Stasy had previously filed protective orders against him citing threats and physical assault, some of which were not successfully served. The arrest history of Heinrich, including a recent domestic abuse battery charge with release on low bond, drew attention to how repeat offenders could re-enter the community despite documented risk. Media outlets quickly reported the case, emphasizing the sequence of warnings that preceded the fatal attack and raising questions about systemic enforcement of protective orders and domestic violence interventions. The public response included discussions on social media and in local news about the adequacy of current protocols to prevent escalation in abusive relationships. Advocates and community members criticized gaps in law enforcement response, including failed service of prior protective orders and the challenges in monitoring individuals with a history of violence. Police emphasized that all evidence at both scenes was collected and processed, confirming that the investigation had been completed. While the criminal case was closed due to Heinrich's death, the events prompted broader reflection on the effectiveness of domestic violence prevention measures and the critical importance of timely intervention in potentially lethal situations. The case of Stacy Charles concludes with the official determination of cause of death for both individuals and the final documentation of the events that led to the tragedy. With both the victim and the suspect deceased, the investigation was formally closed. Law enforcement noted that the case revealed a consistent pattern of warning signs that were documented but not fully addressed before the fatal incident. The closure of the case emphasizes the intersection of documented threats, previous arrests, and systemic limitations in preventing escalation. Investigators highlighted the importance of timely intervention and enforcement of legal protections, demonstrating that the combination of repeated warning signs and insufficient follow-up can result in lethal outcomes. Although the investigation concluded with the deaths of both parties, the broader implications remain for law enforcement and the legal system in addressing domestic violence cases. The case of Stacy Charles serves as a reference point for evaluating how documented abuse histories and legal mechanisms interact with real-world risk, reinforcing the necessity for proactive measures to prevent similar tragedies. This final section provides a comprehensive summary of the case's closure, the confirmed causes of death, and the lessons drawn from systemic gaps that allowed the events to escalate unchecked. And that concludes today's case. But remember, this is just one of countless hidden stories waiting to be brought to light. Here at Crimelens Uncovered, we're committed to digging beneath the surface, giving a voice to those who can no longer speak, and making sure their stories are never lost to time. If today's investigation gave you new perspective, just wait. There are more cases coming that will shock, disturb, and challenge the way you see the world. So don't forget to subscribe, tap the like button, and turn on notifications, so you're always first to know when a new story drops. We release fresh investigations regularly, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's next. Before you go, share your thoughts in the comments. Which part of this case resonated with you most? Your voice helps keep these stories alive. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and remember, the search for justice always begins with the truth. Crimelens Uncovered, where every case finds its voice.